Welcome all to the press briefing. We're just going to give it a minute or two to allow folks to trickle on in, and then we'll get started. Welcome all, and if you're just joining us, I just want to say again, we'll give it another about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get things moving. So thank you for your patience. Right, I think we're good to get started. So thank you all for joining. My name is Travis Ayton, and I'm the Communications and Campaign Manager with the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. And welcome to our briefing on the important upcoming Council and Assembly meetings of the International Seabed Authority, the ISA, taking place from July 7th to the 18th, the Council meeting, and then July 21st to 25th Assembly. And this is where governments will convene in Kingston, Jamaica to continue negotiations on whether to open the deep sea to commercial deep sea mining. Just a note that we are recording this briefing, and so we will be circulating the recording to participants afterwards and those unable to attend. So let's jump right in, so we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So during the 3-week meeting coming up in July, ISA member states will continue negotiations on a draft mining code, and this is amid divergent viewpoints between delegations, mounting environmental, cultural, and economic concerns, and a growing coalition of countries, and now 37 strong, calling for a moratorium, precautionary pause, or ban on the industry. The ISA is meeting at a time when the Metals Company, or TMC, is attempting to bypass the ISA and unilaterally mine the international seabed, a move that was met with universal condemnation by ISA member states at the March 2025 Council meeting. So for the briefing today, we have some amazing panelists to highlight key issues surrounding deep sea mining, the ISA meetings, and the moratorium campaign. So first, we'll hear from Emma Wilson, Policy Officer with the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, who will cover the state of play of the moratorium campaign and what to expect at the upcoming meeting. Second, we'll have Julia Sigward and Carly Rospart with the Seckenberg Ocean Species Alliance, covering environmental concerns with deep sea mining, species threatened by the industry, and really how we lack the baseline data or science to even build an effective regulations in the first place. Third, we have Louisa Castledine, co-founder of the Ocean Tapuna Regeneration and spokesperson for Ocean Advocacy Collective and Ocean Ancestors. Louisa is from the Cook Islands and is a place where their government is currently conducting exploratory deep sea mining, and where deep sea mining will be occurring in their backyard in the Pacific. So Louisa will discuss what this would mean if deep sea mining occurs in the Pacific, and if a mining code is adopted by the ISA, or potentially, unilaterally mining by TMC in the United States. And last, we'll have Victor Vescovo, co-founder of the Insight Equity Holdings and also a deep sea explorer. Victor will be joining us 30 minutes in. He does have a clash, and so if you do see another face pop up, that will be Victor joining us there. And so how this will work, we'll run through the 4 speakers, and then of course at the end we'll have a Q&A. But as your questions arise, we do have a chat function and a Q&A section, so please feel free to drop your questions in there as they arise, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. So let's jump right in. I'm going to hand it over to Emma Wilson. Emma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Travis, and thank you so much, everyone, for your interest in this really important topic and for taking the time to be with us today. So as we move into these upcoming ISA meetings, we do have actually an unprecedented situation in that it is the first time ever that an application for exploitation in international waters is actually on the table. Now, as Travis said, this application comes from the Metals Company, which historically is the company that has been pushing the most aggressively in the international space for the launch of deep sea mining. And of course, as we know, they are no longer applying via ISA channels, but via US channels, essentially trying to sidestep international legal frameworks. So, what we see from this is it really actually just confirms what we've always known, that, the metals company is a rogue and irresponsible actor that actually doesn't take environmental or social responsibilities seriously at all. Now, as Travis mentioned, this new development has been condemned by the international community represented at the ISA and has met with particular criticism from China, France, and the EU Commission, all of whom have publicly stated that they perceive these actions as a violation of international customary law. So, of course, all this is happening against a backdrop of growing global opposition to the industry, and this was really manifested very clearly at UNOC. So what we saw playing out at the UN Oceans Conference was we got four more calls for a moratorium from 4 new countries in the space of 1 day. Those countries were Slovenia, Latvia, Cyprus, and the Marshall Islands, plus also Luxembourg, who'd announced the previous week. So that takes us to a total of 37 countries calling for a moratorium, pause, or ban on deep sea mining. Alongside those governments, we also saw 3 major French financial institutions who announced their decision to add deep sea mining to their exclusion list. So now there are 24 major financial institutions throughout the world that have said that they will not finance deep sea mining or any activity in relation with deep sea mining. So that's really strong. We also saw calls for a precautionary pause from major players, major individuals, such as the President of the Council of the EU, Chatham House, and also the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights, who over the past few months has been really highlighting the very strong potential for some significant human rights violations in relation with deep sea mining. And then, of course, we also saw the UN Secretary General himself once again warning of the risks of deep sea mining. It's not the first time that he's expressed concern, but he came out again with that expression of concern at UNOC, really calling for precaution. And then, of course, we saw numerous ministers describing a moratorium as the only reasonable option at this point. So it was very strong hearing these, powerful narratives from, strong influencers and strong decision makers in that UNOC forum. But of course, now what we need is to see this high level of ambition being carried into the place where it matters, and that is the International Seabed Authority. This is where the decisions are made. This is where we need to see governments standing strong against essentially foul play by industry. Now, the ISA has historically been a forum that has been heavily influenced by the mining industry, but we really need to see that stopping this year. And as we saw at UNOC, there are many governments who consider that the appropriate response to the current scenario is a moratorium on deep sea mining and ASAP. So, of course, a moratorium would not only safeguard the marine environment, but it would also safeguard the credibility of the ISA as an institution. Like, if we think about it, what will look better in the historical records of the future? A weak ISA that adopts an ineffective mining code this year because they're feeling pressured by one cowboy company that has decided to step away from the ISA anyway, or a solid and responsible authority that respects due process and takes the time required to ensure sufficient science for informed decision-making around a highly complex and controversial issue. So, with this in mind, the upcoming meeting is really going to be a defining moment for the ISA and actually a real test of its credibility as a regulator. And there are kind of 4 key questions arising in advance of this meeting. The first is, will negotiators reject pressure to adopt the mining code this July? 2, will the ISA finally prioritize the establishment of a general environmental policy to guide its decision-making in a way that ensures the protection of nature is the #1 priority? 3, will the ISA respond to the inappropriate actions of the metals company that is, of course, nudging a major world power into a breach of international law? And 4, will governments finally unite around a decision to formalize a pause on the transition to exploitation unless and until certain conditions are met? So, #1, the mining code. The situation today is that the ISA Secretariat is essentially pushing for a finalized text by the end of the July meeting, and to this end has proposed non-transparent and inequitable working methods to get there. Now, of course, this seems just completely ridiculous in a context where independent experts are pointing to at least 30 major outstanding matters to be resolved within the mining code. And I should just flag also that some of the major aspects of the regulatory framework have never even actually been discussed at the ISA. And yet now we're hearing from the ISA Secretariat a call to finalize this text. And then, of course, more importantly still, we are hearing from a large group of independent scientists that still regularly affirm that at least another 10 to 15 years of research is required to be able to properly inform certain aspects of the regulatory framework. So this sort of frenzied rush just seems totally out of step with the reality of the situation of our knowledge and also of the current social context around deep sea mining, which is facing a lot of resistance. So we really hope to see member states rejecting the adoption of the mining code and also pushing back against this unreasonably accelerated pace of work. The second point was regarding the establishment of a general environmental policy. Now, there have been multiple proposals over the last 2 years to establish a general environmental policy, which cumulatively in July 2024 and in March 2025 have received support from 85 ISA member states. So that's a big chunk. That have unfortunately been blocked by a very small minority. We're talking 15, 16 states blocking. Now, of course, the ISA is responsible for ensuring the effective protection of the marine environment. This is the ISA's mandate, and it's kind of madness that it doesn't yet have a general environmental policy. So we would really encourage states to ensure that ball gets rolling and ensure that a general environmental policy is put in place in the very near future. This would act as a central governance pillar in guiding the ISA's work, and it would be a major step forward in the ISA actually proving that it takes its environmental responsibilities seriously. So the third point was regarding a response to the actions of the metals company. Now, ISA member states essentially have 2 ways in which they can demonstrate that this kind of unilateral action is unacceptable to the international community. The first is that they can call on the International Seabed Authority Secretary General, Letitia Carvalho, to send formal warnings to the 2 TMC branches that have ISA contracts. So those branches are called NORI and TOML. And the Secretary General can essentially request those contractors to desist from any activity that supports, advances, or endorses this endeavor of TMC via the US on the grounds that they risk acting in breach of international law and also in breach of their agreements with the ISA. Now, the second thing that member states can do is that they can also communicate publicly at the ISA their intention to ensure that any actors within their own country's jurisdiction do not enable, support, or participate in a unilateral and illegal mining operation. So, of course, this is relevant to numerous countries represented at the ISA who have companies that have ties with the metals company. And it would be good to hear specifically from those countries at this meeting. And the fourth and most important point is about the ISA as an institution finally formalizing a pause on the transition to exploitation. Now, in the context of this situation with the US, formalizing this decision to prevent exploitation activities unless and until certain conditions are fulfilled would be the ultimate signal to those seeking to undermine the ISA and seeking to undermine international law that the global community is united in condemning unilateral actions and in protecting the multilateral process and, of course, our global oceans. So we really encourage member states of the ISA just to do whatever it takes to get this over the line in a binding decision that would be anchored in science and in international law. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening, and very much looking forward to your questions and comments after the other speakers.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma, for that wonderful overview there. And I think, yeah, it's really, we're shaping up to see how states are going to react at this ISA meeting, as this US TMC announcement, because in the March meeting, they just made the announcement. In between this time, from March until now, that has happened. And so the ISA has not convened since then. And so, we're really it's going to be interesting to see how states respond and how forcefully as well. Next, we're going to jump to Julia Sigward and Carly Rospart with the Senckenberg Ocean Species Alliance to discuss, some of the environmental concerns, threats to species in the deep, and yeah, this kind of lack of science and data that Emma referenced briefly as well to even, build something that or to inform us of, the impacts of deep sea mining and what that means for us all. So over to you guys.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Emma, for stating all of this so clearly and for organizing this opportunity for us to speak to these issues. My name is Dr. Julia Sigward. I'm a professor of marine biology and a curator of the mollusk collections here in the Senckenberg Museum in Frankfurt. The Senckenberg is the largest natural history museum in Germany, and we're a leader in deep sea research. And this is my colleague, Carly. Carly Rospart is our science communication officer, and she'll be attending part of the meetings in Jamaica in a couple of weeks. So she's the face that you should look out for. And we are going to this meeting, or Carly is representing us at this meeting, because the Senckenberg Museum wrote a statement to the German delegation to the ISA calling for a precautionary pause on deep sea mining. Because as a research organization, we realize how important it is to have this opportunity to understand the diversity of deep sea ecosystems and the potential impacts, the irreversible impacts of the actions that mining would cause. We have made amazing strides, especially in the last decade, to better understand the deep ocean. There are new frontiers being opened by technology that we could never have imagined at the beginning of my career. But we also know how much there is still left to discover. I'm a taxonomist. I name new species. That's part of my job. So I understand firsthand how much left is undiscovered, unnamed, and unprotected. Senckenberg is actually a partner of the IUCN Global Red List. So we are a major investor in supporting red listing and understanding the conservation species by species. So when we started the work of the Senckenberg Ocean Species Alliance, there were no species from the deep sea hydrothermal vents that were listed as endangered. That's not because they weren't endangered. That's because we didn't have the scientific expertise to assess the potential harm of deep sea mining. And now we're actively working on completing those assessments. And I'm going to show you a picture now of the first species that was put onto the IUCN Red List, the first ever species that was listed as endangered due to deep sea mining. And it's this absolutely incredible snail, the scalyfoot snail, or the scalyfoot gastropod, which was the first animal to be assessed as endangered due to deep sea mining. But this is not the only one. And I'm going to show you a few other stories because I think it's really important to see a face. Now, this is a snail that doesn't have eyes, but still, it's a face. It's a species
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
that makes this more more personal. It makes it, you know, something that's not just impacting a faraway land that's completely aseptic, that's completely anonymous. These are the species that live in the areas that are targeted by deep sea mining. The scalyfoot snail is an incredible animal that actually is the only known organism that integrates metal directly into its skeleton. You can see its black shell and its black scales that cover its foot. These are mineralized with iron that it takes from the hydrothermal vent clouds, the precipitate that comes out of the black smokers. So it's an incredible model, not only for biodiversity and the power of animal evolution, but also for nanomaterials and biotechnology that we've only just started to scratch the surface. This is another species called Macrostylus metallicola. It's a tiny deep sea amphipod that lives on polymetallic nodules, another area of the deep sea that's a major target of deep sea mining, especially by companies like the Metals Company. This species was named after the band Metallica by my colleague here in Senckenberg, and so it's become a little bit of a mascot for them and for their fans. And if we remove the nodules, if through mining we remove these polymetallic nodules, of course we remove the home of this species and many others that still have never been named. And then finally, I want to show you an amphipod, another kind of tiny deep sea shrimp. This is actually a relatively large one. And this is also found on hydrothermal vents. But this species, Exomelita cygnea, is only known from one hydrothermal vent field, which is actually already opened for mining. This species will go extinct if Norway continues mining the way that it's planning. So these are the species that we want you to meet. And Carly has all of these species on postcards. And so you are very welcome to, oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. That's good. You're very welcome to find her at the ISA meeting and collect all three and try to save all three and many more. Thanks a lot. And we look forward to taking your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julia and Carly. That's great. And yeah, I mean, it brings in the wider context, you know, sometimes it's out of sight, out of mind for the deep sea, and really just to highlight what we could be losing from deep sea mining, and you know, this real irreversible and permanent impacts the deep sea will feel, and you know, we will never get these species back. And so, you know, that's why urging the precaution, let's do the science. Yeah, it all sounds great. So thank you. So right up, and yeah, I just want to say as well, with the Q&A function that we do have, if you do have any questions to our participants, please feel free to drop them in there as they arise, and you know, we will get to them at the end. So now we're gonna jump to our third speaker, Louisa, to discuss kind of what deep sea mining would mean from a Pacific context, and you know, they will be on the front lines if mining through the ISA does begin. It's in the Pacific first and foremost. Could expand to other oceans, but you know, it will be in their backyard first. So over to you, Louisa.
Kia ora tātou katoa, ko Louisa Castledine taku ingoa. Greetings and hello to everyone. My name is Louisa Castledine. I am the managing director of an organization called Ocean Tour Cook Islands, and we have founded a charitable trust called Ocean Tupuna, which has a focus on ocean regeneration as a counterforce to deep sea mining. And I'm also the spokesperson of an ocean advocacy collective called Ocean Ancestors here in the Cook Islands. And I'm also an Atlantic Fellow in Indigenous-led social equity leadership at the University of Melbourne as well. So I'm really excited to be joining the conversation today. In terms of the Pacific region, one of the key things that springs to mind is obviously the building geopolitical tensions that is happening here in our region. There are obviously current power dynamics at play at the moment. And for me, the lens is that it is contemporary militarization here in the Pacific. In February of this year, our government recently signed a cooperative strategic agreement with China. And this took our people by surprise. But not only did it take our people by surprise, but also a very traditional partner of ours, which was also New Zealand. And within those complexities, it also led to a vote of no confidence here in our government. Mark Brown managed to retain his position within government. However, things seem to be on shaky legs currently here in the Cook Islands. And for one of the key things that we understand is that we need to stop romanticizing the idea that these minerals will serve, renewable energy, the green energy transition, and we need to wake up to the idea that all it really is doing is enabling militarism here in the Pacific. We have a long history of militarization littered throughout our history, and what we want to prevent is a repeat of that history where we end up being the collateral damage of political tensions. And not long after that cooperative agreement was signed here, well, actually it was signed in China between the Cook Islands, there was then interest from Kiribati to engage with China. And shortly thereafter that, the shift with TMC and the states obviously implementing their actions around, the need to increase national security as well. And so we are caught in between political tensions of really key superpowers. And that strategic agreement between China, although very loose, there are MOUs that are specifically targeted around our seabed minerals, around aquaculture. And on the surface, in terms of messaging and language being used by our government, is that we are a partner. But what we are also conscious of is that we are adopting a new economic master, and that what can be perceived as being partnership is actually not what we call self-determination, but shifting our dependency to an even greater superpower within the global climate. One that we understand, they are particularly interested in engaging with countries who have no surveillance over their waters, which is exactly the situation that we're in. And we also have weak regulatory enforcement here in the Cook Islands. And so we are just the golden apple for them in order to be able to not only access intellectual property here within our oceans, but also easy access to these minerals in our deep waters here. And so what it does do is it fractures our relations that we currently have with our traditional partners, which is New Zealand. And one of the key examples is that just in the last week, New Zealand, who weren't consulted on our agreement or foreign affairs with China, have put a pause to any of the aid that they currently provide to our country. So they have ongoing implications, and currently they have paused just over $18 million in aid for our country. And that really will impact sectors like our health sector and our education system as well. Secondly, one of the key things that is occurring on the ground here within the Cook Islands is what I refer to as the infiltration of mining companies. They are very comfortable here on our island. We have 3 mining companies here who are very much entrenched in the fabric and society of our country. They currently fund our largest cultural festivals, Māori medicine, carvers, orators, and they have been very strategic about how they place aid within our communities. And they are swaying what we would say religious council advisors to also swaying those who are traditional leaders amongst our people. And what that does do is it erodes our connection and relationship to identity, indigeneity, as well as what we refer to our sacred places. And I mean the deep sea. What they have been doing is really polished, curated presentations to our people, and they really leverage off of our hospitality as Pacifica people, but also the deep trust that we have for people with whom we are in relationship with. And so that is a concern for us, in which they infiltrate our community and our society, but they really do leverage the vulnerabilities of our people, particularly around the idea that mining the deep sea will pull us out of our dependency, or some of these relationships that we would have with China or with New Zealand, particularly packaged around this prosperity package that our people are likely to inherit big amounts of dollars as a result of us mining the deep sea. It further exasperates colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism here within our country, diminishing our customary practices, but also our Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. It really separates us from that innate Indigenous kind of tie to our ancestral connections to the deep sea. And so it really erodes and dilutes, one, our autonomy as a culture and as a people. It also is really putting a lot of pressure and testing the democracy that we operate within at the moment. And these political and geopolitical tensions really brings into question our agency over our ocean and our water as ocean people. And now more than ever, there is this defining time between what does sovereignty actually look like and what is genuine self-determination. Is what we're doing with China and the USA self-determination, or are we shifting dependency and increasing our vulnerability as a people? One of the third things that also comes to mind, particularly around this narrative of economic stability, is that it cannibalizes our largest economic revenue streams as well, and that's tourism and fisheries. And so the promise of this economic diversification that our government is trying to pursue becomes eroded by the idea that our tourism industry is likely to be impacted by the idea of deep sea mining happening in our waters. They have been clear and kind of brushing that under the carpet and saying, no, there won't be an impact. But the perception of people to be, is really important. And whether or not people would still choose to visit our islands, knowing what we're doing in the deep sea will be a real shift in what we would describe as being a stewarded destination, one that's desirable. And so it compromises a lot of the Pacific in that way, in what we have been portrayed on the global world around being protectors and stewards of our home environment and our oceans, that really corrodes that identity that we have built over years. The benefits of the industry is that it has opened the gates to obviously discovering what is in the deep sea. And so the narrative here within the Cook Islands is that the research phase that we are conducting is expanding our knowledge as a people. However, in the last 3.5 years in what is a 5-year research license, to me, serves an agenda that to me is predatorial. It's predatory in the sense that this research phase that we are currently in, I consider grooming, because it's being done with a lens to actually abuse our deep sea. And so we need to be conscious that our reception to even just doing the research increases our vulnerability, and it is a tendency to groom because it has the outlook of wanting to mine. And so we need to become more conscious and discerning about the way in which that intellectual property is being used against us as well. The deep sea for us is not just a place of common heritage for mankind. It is also an intergenerational power for all of us. We use the deep sea as an ancestral reflective learning and guidance for us. It is our present day sustenance, and it also provides ambition for our future generations. And we need to be more conscious about the narrative, but also the inheritance that our decisions today will leave for our future descendants. And so for us as ocean ancestors, we are very conscious about being responsible ocean ancestors moving forward, not just for here in the Cook Islands, but also the wider Pacific region. We have a shared responsibility to ensure that what we pass on to the next generation is not just of current state, but one that is thriving and abundant. And the prevention of this industry would ensure that what we currently have here can be built on, but not leave the inheritance of loss, damage, and recovery for our future generations. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to taking on some questions after this.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that overview and your perspectives and, kind of highlighting what this means for the Pacific. And, not the first time in history where we've seen, mining companies go into certain areas with, bad intentions and, not working out the way in the end. And so, there's definitely lessons learned I think we can apply here. And I think this segues great into our final speaker, Victor Vescovo, who is the co-founder of Insight Equity Holdings and also a deep sea explorer, to explore kind of the growing economic and financial concerns with this industry, and then as well to touch on a bit about what the Trump admin's recent moves toward deep sea mining means for the US and for the world. So thanks so much for joining, Victor. Over to you.
Great, thank you all very much. And I appreciate all the comments that have been made thus far. I'm going to be approaching this from the non-environmental, non-cultural significance, but really hone in on the technological, technical, financial, and other issues with the deep sea mining pitch, because unfortunately, I think that they are down a track that they actually are ignoring those concerns, environmental and cultural, which are very real. And there have to be other arguments made in order to raise questions about their model for proceeding. My quick background, as stated, I'm an industrialist. I did 20 years of private equity. One of the companies I owned actually was a metal processor for copper and other non-ferrous metals. So I know a little bit about the actual technical processes of mining and processing these metals. But I've also designed and developed ultra deep diving vehicles that go all the way down to the Mariana Trench. I've probably spent more time operating multi-ton machinery below 5,000 meters than I think probably only about other 10 people have done that. So I know what breaks and how difficult it is to operate down there. And now I'm a venture capitalist. In fact, Impossible Metals even pitched me to invest in their company, and I turned them down because on a financial and economic and technical basis, it didn't make sense to me. Okay, I'm going to go through a lot of this very rapidly because there are a lot of arguments about why deep sea mining is not a good investment, and buttress why I just don't think it's going to work. And it's being carried along by the inertia of those that are proposing it after a situation for the industry has changed significantly. First, and most important, and the thing that they really want to keep kind of quiet, but is very real, is that polymetallic nodules only have 4 metals that you can mine in any economic quantities. That's it. I can't emphasize it enough. There are only 4. There aren't 30. The seafloor is not this cornucopia of critical metals that will solve all needs for electrification of the world or national security. There are only 4: nickel, cobalt, copper, and manganese. Copper and manganese are quite common in terrestrial mines, and they trade for very low prices. I mean, in the dollars per pound, single digits. You wouldn't mine the seafloor to get copper and manganese. The real issue, and in the financials of, say, the metals company or Impossible Metals, the real money makers are nickel and cobalt. This had some traction back in the early 2000s, around 2001 or so, because there was a huge surge of investments in electric vehicles, and people thought that there would be a shortage of nickel and copper because that was at the time a major metal that was used for the most common battery metals that used nickel, manganese, and cobalt. That's what Tesla uses. That's what the early Chinese vehicles used. It made sense. So copper prices went up dramatically. So back in March of 2022, nickel was going for $16 a pound. Cobalt was going for $36 a pound. Even copper was at $4.7 per pound. Today, as of current metal prices, nickel is trading at $6.9 per pound, a 56% decrease from March of 2022 in just 3 years. Cobalt has gone down to $15 a pound, 58% decrease. And that is helped by the fact that the Democratic Republic of Congo, which produces 90% of the world's cobalt, has suspended exports because of the crash in market prices caused by larger nickel mines in Indonesia also producing cobalt. So that's kind of an artificial price. It's even lower on a real price. And copper has basically been flat. It's actually gone down about 5%. So you have major decreases in the core metals of deep sea mining, nickel and cobalt, when these prices were supposed to go up because of shortages to produce these batteries. Why is that? Well, the issue is battery technology has changed significantly. And that's what capitalism does. We invest money to come up with better, cheaper, more effective solutions. And that's exactly what China did. They now produce more electric vehicle batteries than any country on earth by far. And the majority of them, by some estimates, 70, 75%, are lithium iron phosphate. Those use no nickel, cobalt, manganese, or copper. They use cheaper metals. They use lithium, of course, which is not that cheap, but it's actually not the big element. It's iron and phosphorus, which are actually quite cheap. They don't have quite the energy density of nickel, cobalt-based batteries, but they actually have more cycle life. They're cheaper to produce, and they've advanced to the point where they have enough range to make them highly marketable. By the way, just today, Tesla tweeted out, they announced that they're nearing completion of their first lithium iron phosphate battery production facility in the US. They're doing that because they know that it's essential for their cost structure to move to cheaper batteries and away from nickel and cobalt-based batteries. And by the way, by the early 2027, an American firm called Lyten, L-Y-T-E-N, they've already started construction for the next generation battery that is sodium ion. That uses even cheaper materials than lithium iron phosphate batteries. And the characteristics of those batteries surpass even lithium iron phosphate. They could have even more major impacts on the old school lithium, nickel, cobalt-based batteries. They are indeed, in many respects, yesterday's technology. That's why China has put so much resources into lithium ion. This is a critical point that people have to understand. There are only two metals of any major economic consequence on the seafloor, and they're being replaced. Do your own research. Look at all this. I'm just saying what's out there already. Okay, next I'll go to the change of strategy. In 2021, when the metals company went public, on their cover of their investor presentation was an electric vehicle surrounded by wind farms and solar panels. They just redid their strategy where now that's no longer the case. They have moved away from saying, oh, we're going to electrify vehicles, because I think they know this technological change has happened and happened quickly. Now they're saying it's about getting strategic metals for countries, especially the United States. So they've completely changed it, saying, oh, it's not about actually, the viability of these metals. You need them just to break the supply chain of China. The issue there is that they're conflating mining the seafloor with economic security of these metals. China dominates metal processing, not because of where they get the ore, the rocks. They get it, the dominance, because they process the metals so cheaply and effectively, because they have a low cost position in the world. They have 30 years experience doing it, and it's environmentally very dirty to process these metals. This is something the West outsourced to China during the glory days of the 90s and 2000s because it just made sense. We got cheap metal, they got dominance, we didn't mind at the time. Well, now people do. And the metals company is trying to jump into that breach saying, oh, you can get metal security by mining the seafloor. What they keep forgetting to mention is the fact that, oh, just for two metals, cobalt and nickel, and oh, by the way, the prices of them are dropping dramatically. Okay, now let's move on to technical. The technical aspects of deep sea mining are completely underestimated. All they tend to do is throw it over saying, oh, our partner is Allseas and they know how to work on the bottom of the ocean. No one has ever commercially mined polymetallic nodules from the seafloor. In fact, the only pilot test that the metals company did 2 years ago was with a subscale collector. They've never actually built a full-scale collector and tested it on the seafloor. And by the way, they didn't disclose what the uptime of that machine was. They didn't describe its actual yield per hour. And that was very telling. They didn't even raise the full amount of nodules they were allowed to raise by their permit. If I was in charge of a company, I would have maxed that permit out just to show what we could do. There were rumors that there were also technical difficulties, as you always have in operating the deep sea floor with new technology. I know I certainly did. They have a huge assumption on how much they are going to mine the seafloor. Well, what if that is off by 30% or 40%? at least in the first couple of years while they're working out the kinks. That has a profound impact on their financials and profitability because that comes directly off the top line. If you mine less nodules, you get proportionally less revenue, and your costs are relatively fixed to go out and get these nodules on the high seas. Also, how are they even going to transfer the metals at sea? That's one thing I've never really understood, because they're going to mine the nodules with the collectors, put them on a ship like the Hidden Gem they have. How does the metal actually get to the processing center? The Hidden Gem is not going to suspend mining and cruise 2 to 3 weeks to South Korea, which is their new partner, dump the nodules, come back and keep mining. That's not in their yield calculations. Oh, so they're going to transfer the metal at sea. When was the last time anyone transferred tens of thousands of tons of rocks at sea from a mining platform into a container ship? You can do it with oil because oil is liquid, and you know that can work, and you don't do it anyway. They fill up the tankers and then they leave. This is a very different technical problem, which is very dangerous to transfer that amount of weight in the high seas conditions. And then finally, a quick word about Impossible Metals, since we're talking about technical aspects. Impossible Metals is a small startup. To my research, it's only collected about 15, maybe even 20 million of money to do preliminary research. They've never actually built or tested any of their collector devices at any depth exceeding 100 meters. They've only tested a smaller version in a bay in Canada. So it's a wishful thinking in many respects. And their financials, you know, their own financials say they're going to need more than $1 billion to actually develop the technology and the fleet that they would need to do what they say they're going to do. So I think that's just a very risky proposition right there. Okay, the financial models for the metals company, they've now dramatically reduced the amount of capital expenditures that they said that they were going to do initially. They originally said they were going to spend $8 billion building ships, processing centers, all these things. Well, now they're realizing the cash is pretty short and people aren't believing their whole story. So now they're saying they're going to use a lot of subcontractors. They're going to process metals in Korea or in Japan, and then they're going to sell them on the open market. They're going to lease ships. They're not going to buy and operate them. Well, where is that reflected in their financials? These subcontractors aren't going to work for free. They have a bad habit of just using the same financials they've been using since 2021 and not showing the negative impacts that all these changes to their strategy, to metals prices, to their cost structure have had. They've had no cost increases since 2021 in their financial models, even though we've had some of the highest inflation in the last 30 years. They are not addressing the discount rate. The interest rate they use to evaluate their financial models is the same number they used in 2021, even though interest rates have more than doubled. When you change that simple number in the footnotes, it has a dramatically negative impact on their projected profitability. Also talk about the environmental comparisons. There's a false equivalence. This is just the one thing I'll say about the environment. They say it's better to mine a square kilometer of the seafloor than a square kilometer of the Indonesian rainforest, tugging at your heartstrings. Well, there are two issues with that. A lot of mining is not done in Indonesia. We can also get nickel and cobalt and copper from Australia, the Western deserts there, from Canada and other places. Yes, a lot of mining happens in Indonesia and they do destroy rainforests. But the issue there is that those are three-dimensional veins of metal ore. They're not two-dimensional films on the bottom of the ocean. To get the same amount of ore from the seafloor would require orders of magnitude of destruction of physical area than does a mine, because they're thick veins in 3 dimensions. They don't like to mention that fact, and making the comparisons is tricky. It's just easier to say, oh, a square kilometer of rainforest versus a square kilometer of seafloor, but it's not at all the same thing. There's a different density. And finally, the last major comment that I'll make is on the legal aspects. The metals company only had about $4.5 million of cash around March or April of this year. They were almost out. That's why they had the huge shift in strategy to go to the United States and say, it doesn't look like we're going to get a permit from the ISA. We're going to run out of cash. And so they ran to the Americans saying, give us a permit. They did that because that was a huge positive spike for their stock, because then they could go out to the market and raise more money. And that's exactly what they did. They've raised almost $100 million of cash based on the US giving them a permit, potentially, from NOAA that is not sanctioned by the ISA. In fact, the Secretary General of the ISA has now stated publicly that if a company mines in international waters without an ISA permit, that is a violation of international law. okay, if that's the case, who is actually going to execute this work? Sure, the metals company could incorporate a new USA subsidiary and get the permit for that subsidiary. But what companies will actually go and do the mining? Allseas? They are headquartered in Switzerland and they have a Dutch owner. Both those countries are signatories of the UN Law of the Sea. By the UN Law of the Sea, those countries are obligated to take action against countries that are violating the precepts of the UN Law of the Sea, which include mining of the seafloor can only be done by those with a permit properly adjudicated by the ISA. What about Korean zinc? If they're processing the metals and the metals are illegally obtained, will they be violating the law? They are also a signatory. In fact, just in the last day, Japan metal processor that they were going to use has come out and said that there are, quote, serious questions about whether or not they could use minerals that are mined that are not done via an ISA permit. So the first inklings of countries saying, hey, wait a second, if you're not going to have a permit from the ISA, what is the legal status of these metals? Those are very important questions. What about the crews? What about the insurance companies? Are they going to insure a ship like the Hidden Gem to go and mine in international waters without an ISA permit? That opens them up for major legal claims for violating international law. These are huge issues. So I think the metals company traded one set of problems, not getting a permit from the ISA, for a whole new set of problems of potentially illegally mining in international waters. So those are things that absolutely have to be taken a look at. And then finally, the US. It's been hilarious to me that they went to the Trump administration saying that this will actually allow for a lot of jobs in the US, a lot of technology development and all those types of things. Well, now they're just getting a permit, but they're going to mine in international waters using a Dutch ship. They're going to send the metal to Korea, and then they're going to market them on the open market. Where's the benefit for the United States? And what will the US say when they catch on that actually the metals company is just trying to stay alive and they can't invest all this money in the United States like they said they would to preserve our metal security? And then finally, last thing, what about China and India? Yes, they're investigating the seafloor for polymetallic nodules. If they thought that there was actually real money to be made or that it was important to their strategy to mine the seafloor, they would have done it by now. They certainly have the resources. They certainly have enough data. I think that they're not doing it because they realize it's just not necessary and it's far too expensive and technically risky. So with that, I will conclude, and we're happy to go to questions, I imagine.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, Victor, for that wonderful overview. And it reminds me. I think I saw in a news or science article published recently that deep sea mining is a multi-million-dollar solution to problems that don't exist. And I think your presentation highlights that perfectly there. So yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
And yeah, so as we said, we do have some time. We have about 7 minutes for some questions. If you do have them, I see there was one in the chat earlier, and Victor did kind of touch on this. Is like, how can you detail what the consequences of Trump's April decision to authorize deep sea mining? And so you're kind of touching on that there, Victor, as well. But I do just want to throw this over to Emma real quick to see if the DSCC has anything we'd like to say about this. There's implications for the U.S. and the ISA and the world as well. So yeah, over to you, Emma, and then we can open up to the wider group as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And as you said, Travis, I think Victor did cover this very, very well in his presentation. I mean, perhaps from our perspective, also just to highlight the implications that this does have for the ISA. And during my presentation, I went into a little bit of what the ISA can do in response to these actions, which Victor has also touched on here. But what we're seeing currently is that there are certain parties involved in the negotiations at the ISA who are essentially trying to accelerate processes at the ISA, trying to accelerate the adoption of the mining code in a really irresponsible manner, in an uninformed manner, actually. Also, as we heard from Julia earlier, that scientific data and information quite simply isn't sufficient for responsible decision making at the ISA. So in terms of the immediate knock-on effect in the international sphere of what TMC is trying to do via the US, I would say that's kind of the major current consequence at the ISA, this real attempt to accelerate and speed up the adoption of the mining code, which seems nonsensical anyway, because the metals company has confirmed that they will be pursuing the US pathway and not the ISA pathway. So what, they're accelerating this whole process for an actor that's saying that they're not going to go via the ISA anyway. It doesn't make sense. So as I mentioned, what we really hope to see at the ISA is member states pushing back against this attempt to accelerate the mining code and therefore accelerate opening up the international seabed to mining on a large commercial scale. There are, as Victor said, several actions that those states can take. First of all, is that they themselves as states can ensure that no actors within their jurisdiction are involved in any way in unilateral actions being conducted by TMC that would be a violation of international customary law. And of course, ISA member states can also call upon the Secretary General of the ISA to send out warnings to the ISA contractors that are connected to the metals company, warning them that they potentially by their association can be engaging in a violation of international law, and with a request to desist any furtherance of TMC's actions via the US. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, and this is also in relation to this acceleration of processes, it does seem that many states do perceive a moratorium on deep sea mining as an appropriate response to what's currently happening in the US, and indeed this would be a very clear signal from the international community that this kind of action will not be accepted, and it's essentially one of the only pathways of really demonstrating that demonstrating the strength of the international community and defending multilateralism and defending international law.
If I could interject real quick, the United States does not have the physical assets to prosecute deep sea mining. Right now, there is only one ship in the world that is properly equipped and configured to mine seafloor nodules. It's the Hidden Gem. That right now is the absolute fulcrum for deep sea mining. If that ship cannot mine the seafloor because of any restrictions put on it by the host nations of the people providing that support and the crew and the captain, it stops for now. It would take years to build the equipment that could go out and mine on the high seas. So that really is the key focus. I can't even find out the name of the captain of the Hidden Gem. What citizen is he of? Is he potentially personally liable for mining the seafloor against international law? Those are the kind of things that will chill the great ardor that is being pursued by the metals company and others.
Wonderfully. Thank you both for that. And I think that those great answers. I think that segues. We can do one more question here real quickly, which is, with all this information and knowledge, going unilaterally, why deep sea mining is not needed, not necessary, and really not worth the risk. Why do some governments remain interested in nodules given their limited current and future application and consequent lowering value?
Real quick, I'll just say it's because a great argument was made saying, hey, maybe it will work, and if it does work, maybe we even only get a couple of $1 million. That'll buy a hospital. And if it doesn't work, okay, they damage the seafloor, but we'll find out really fast and the damage will be relatively contained and not as bad as they say it will be. That's kind of a hard argument to come against, because what if I am wrong? What if it is this cornucopia of wealth? And they're thinking, well, it's a risk, but it's not that bad. And maybe it does work. That's the logic.
Thank you. Emma, last 30 seconds to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with Victor's response, but would also just add to that interestingly, over the last few years, we are seeing that those countries who do support pushing forward with deep sea mining are increasingly isolated. There are fewer and fewer countries in that room at the ISA who support deep sea mining going forward in the immediate future. And there are a few outstanding who remain fairly aggressive in the negotiations, and indeed, as Louisa highlighted earlier, the Cook Islands is one of them. But that number is reducing, and alongside that, we're also seeing more and more countries saying moratorium, pause, or ban on deep sea mining. So it does feel like we're at a bit of a pivotal point, and that the balance is shifting there. And I would say that that is a major shift, even in the space of the last 2 years. So to be seen how that continues.
Thank you. Louisa, over to you for the last word.
Yeah, just quickly, they are often done, or these decisions are obviously made from positions of vulnerability. And that's why these governments continue to even engage or entertain the idea of the potential, economic prosperity. But to actually, if we were to shift this from governments and actually looked at who could actually diffuse the whole situation, and that would be ISA. If ISA were to really look at what Victor was actually just talking to, why are we even still hosting these gatherings? Because actually we would diffuse that whole situation immediately and actually shift this from being unilateral to multilateral and just actually say, hey, actually, there is still so much more work that needs to be done in the background, and come back to us when that actually happens. So they actually have the authority to diffuse the whole situation altogether.
Yes, thank you, Louisa. That's a great way to end, and they can diffuse it through a moratorium is the best way, which is what we've been advocating for. And so, yeah, I know we're over time right now, but I want to thank everyone so much for joining. A big thanks to our panelists for their amazing presentations and overviews. I think we got some amazing perspectives today of all the various angles, and then we didn't even cover all of them, but how deep sea mining could impact the world, why it's not needed, et cetera, et cetera. And so just in the chat there, I just want to post 2 important links. We have prepared a press kit for media for the upcoming ISA meeting. Includes everything from contacts, spokespeople, background information, recordings, images, press releases, etc. And we'll keep updating that as the meeting goes along. And then as well, on July 24th, the Thursday, a day before the ISA closes its 3-week meeting, we will be hosting a closing ISA press briefing to outline kind of what has happened throughout these 3 weeks and what we can expect moving forward. And so if you are interested in joining that briefing, the registration link is in the chat there. And as I said, we will circulate the recording to this briefing later on today as well. So thank you all so much for joining. And yeah, we'll see you in 4 weeks for the next one.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks all.